Emily's hands shook as she unfolded the yellowed paper, the farmhouse kitchen around her silent, except for the creak of old wood and the soft tick of the wall clock. Across the table, Julia sat upright in her tailored blazer, her manicured nails drumming against the grain of the oak as though impatience alone could force the words from Emily's lips. "Read it out loud," Julia demanded, her voice taut with expectation. Emily swallowed, her eyes flickering across the opening lines. It was their father's handwriting, strong yet uneven from the illness that had carried him away just 3 weeks earlier. She had expected something simple, a division of assets, perhaps a sentimental note. Instead, the very first sentence pulled her breath away. "To my daughters, this home, this land, and all it carries shall not be divided by blood alone." Julia's expression twisted into disbelief. What is that supposed to mean? Emily didn't answer. She was still trying to absorb the words herself, her mind already racing to the long summers in this house, the lessons their father had whispered while teaching her how to mend fences or tend the garden. He had never spoken about inheritance, only responsibility. And now, sitting with Julia's eyes burning holes into her, Emily realized this was no ordinary will. "I'm glad you're here. If you're cozy with the story so far, please like, subscribe to Tears Within, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. We'll weave the next part together." Julia leaned forward, snapping Emily from her thoughts. "Don't you dare twist his words. Everyone knows he meant for me to take charge. You were... what? A guest he decided to keep? This farm is my birthright, Emily. Always was." Emily folded the letter carefully, laying it flat on the table. "He called us both daughters," she said softly. "You heard it yourself." "Daughters," Julia repeated bitterly, as though the word itself was poison. She stood, pacing the narrow kitchen, heels clicking against the linoleum. "You're trying to make this about equality, but family law is clear. Bloodline matters. Judges know it, lawyers know it, the whole town knows it." Emily felt her chest tighten. She had expected Julia to be angry, maybe even cruel, but the naked dismissal still cut deep. It took her back to childhood nights when Julia would whisper taunts about her not being real, not belonging. Back then, their father's presence had shielded her. Now he was gone, and Julia seemed determined to strip that shield away forever. The kitchen window rattled with a gust of cold March wind. Beyond it, the fields lay barren, the soil cracked and waiting for spring rain. Their father had always said the land mirrored the family, sometimes dry and harsh, sometimes fertile and forgiving. Looking out, Emily wondered which season this fight would bring. Julia stopped pacing and planted her hands on the table. "Here's what's going to happen," she said. "You'll sign over your claim. I'll handle the debts, the taxes, the upkeep. You can keep your memories. Isn't that enough for you?" Emily's throat tightened. Memories. That's all Julia thought she deserved. Yet Emily remembered the nights she stayed up with their father, tending to his coughing fits, reading to him when his eyes grew too tired. She remembered his hand on hers as he whispered, "Family isn't given, Emily, it's built." Her voice was steadier than she expected when she answered, "No, I won't sign anything." Julia's eyes narrowed. "Then you'll regret it. Don't think I won't take this to court. I have lawyers, and you—" She gestured at Emily's modest cardigan and weary eyes. "You have nothing." Emily didn't flinch, because though Julia was right about appearances, she didn't know what Emily had found last night in their father's study. Letters tucked inside a locked drawer, tied together with twine. Letters that hinted at something Julia had never suspected. Something that could change everything. She just wasn't ready to reveal it. Not yet. The farmhouse seemed smaller after Julia stormed out, her perfume still lingering in the air like a challenge. Emily sat at the kitchen table long after the door slammed shut, running her fingers over the grain of the oak. The letter lay in front of her, and with it the weight of choices she could no longer avoid. A part of her longed to crumble, to let Julia take the fight and walk away. She was tired, tired of proving herself, tired of reminding people she belonged. But another part of her, the part their father had nurtured, knew surrender would dishonor everything he had trusted her with. The old house groaned as the wind shifted outside. Dust motes floated in the weak sunlight streaming through the curtains. Emily rose, the letter clutched in her hand, and walked toward the study. If she was going to survive what was coming, she needed to understand every secret her father had left behind. She closed the door behind her. The study smelled of pipe tobacco and old leather, the air thick with memories. His desk sat against the far wall, heavy with papers and books. She'd barely touched it since the funeral, afraid of what she might find. But now she pulled open the drawers with trembling hands, bills, deeds, receipts. And then, beneath a stack of yellowing account statements, a small wooden box. Her breath caught as she lifted it out. It was locked, but the tiny brass key lay in plain sight under the blotter, as though he wanted her to find it, but only when the time was right. She slid the key into the lock and turned it. Inside were letters bound in twine, their envelopes brittle with age. On top was one marked in her father's firm handwriting, "For Emily." When the house grows quiet. Her fingers shook as she opened it. "My dearest girl," it began, "if you are reading this, I am gone. I fear Julia will see only money where I see memory and meaning. You must hold steady. The farm is more than walls and fields. It is the root of something greater, something I trust only you to protect." Emily pressed the paper to her chest, eyes blurring with tears. For the first time since his death, she felt him close again. And for the first time since Julia's accusations, she felt certain she had a purpose to stand on. But as the letter unfolded, one line stopped her cold. "You will soon learn of the lake property, and with it the truth I have hidden for years." Emily froze, heart pounding. Lake property? What property? The farmhouse was quiet, yet suddenly it felt alive with questions she couldn't answer. And Emily knew, whatever her father meant by that secret, it was about to pull her deeper into a storm she hadn't yet imagined. Emily barely slept that night. The letter's mention of the lake property looped endlessly in her mind, echoing with every creak of the old farmhouse. She had grown up here, walked every field, memorized every tree and fence post, yet her father had hidden something tied to a lake she had never known belonged to them. At dawn, she pulled on a heavy sweater and went to the attic, a place that still smelled of mothballs and cedar. Boxes were stacked high, many untouched since their mother's death decades earlier. She sifted through old photographs, brittle newspaper clippings, and ledgers until she found a dusty envelope labeled Lakeview. Her breath hitched. Inside were deeds, tax receipts, and a map. The property lay 15 miles north, tucked against a small reservoir where families sometimes fished in the summer. The deed bore her father's signature, dated nearly 20 years ago. Why had he never spoken of it? And why had he left clues only for her? The morning light broke through the slats as she traced the map. For the first time since the funeral, curiosity outweighed grief. She had to see it. By the time she reached the lake, the sun hung pale and weak over the water. A gravel road curved into a clearing where an old cabin stood, weathered but sturdy. Its porch sagged slightly, but the windows were intact, curtains drawn. Emily felt a shiver, not of fear, but of discovery. Unlocking the cabin door with the same key ring she'd found in her father's desk, she stepped into a room filled with dust and silence. The air smelled of pine and ash. On the mantel sat a rusted lantern, beside it a photograph of her father in younger days, smiling with someone Emily didn't recognize, a woman. The photograph leaned against a thick folder marked Project Haven. Emily's heart hammered. She flipped it open and scanned the pages. Architectural sketches, financial plans, grant proposals. This was no vacation cabin. Her father had dreamed of turning the property into a retreat center for foster children, a place of safety and rest. Tears welled as she realized he had been planning this for years, quietly, methodically. And in the margins of the last page, in his unmistakable handwriting, was a note. Emily understands. She'll know what to do. A floorboard creaked behind her. She spun around, clutching the folder. Julia stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes blazing. "So it's true," Julia hissed. "I knew you were hiding something." Emily's mouth went dry. "How did you—" "I followed you," Julia snapped. "You've been sneaking around since the funeral, and I'm not stupid. What is this place? Some secret stash? Another piece of the pie you think you deserve?" Emily held the folder to her chest. "It's not about money, Julia. It's about Dad's dream. He wanted to build something meaningful here." Julia stepped closer, her perfume sharp against the cabin's musty air. "Don't romanticize this. Dreams don't pay bills. Taxes are due on the farm next month, and we're already behind. This," she gestured at the folder, "this is nothing but a distraction." Emily steadied her breath. "It's more than that. He trusted me with it." Julia laughed, harsh and brittle. "Trusted you? You, the outsider? Please. You're clinging to scraps because you know the house and land should be mine. That's why he hid this from me, because even he knew you'd never measure up." Emily flinched, but she didn't look away. "Maybe he hid it because you never cared enough to look." The words hung heavy between them. Julia's face flushed crimson, and for a moment Emily thought she might strike her. Instead, Julia snatched the photograph from the mantel. "Who's this woman? Don't tell me Dad had secrets you don't even understand. I'll find out. And when I do, you'll regret standing in my way." She stormed out, leaving the door wide open to the cold wind. Emily sank into a chair, the folder trembling in her hands. Julia's threat wasn't empty. She had the resources, the lawyers, the charm to turn half the town against her if she wanted. And yet, as Emily looked around the small cabin, she felt her father's presence again. He had left this for her, not Julia, and that meant something bigger was at stake than either of them realized. The next morning, a thick envelope arrived in Emily's mailbox. Inside was a formal letter from Julia's attorney, a demand for Emily to renounce all claims to the Hart estate, including any undisclosed holdings. If she refused, they would pursue litigation. Emily sat at the kitchen table, the letter shaking in her hands. The farmhouse felt heavier than ever, every creak of the beams reminding her of the debts piling up. She couldn't afford lawyers. She barely had enough savings to cover the roof repairs waiting since last winter. The phone rang, startling her. It was Mrs. Whitaker, the neighbor who had brought casseroles after the funeral. Her voice was kind but cautious. "Emily, I don't mean to meddle, but folks at the diner are saying Julia's preparing to take you to court. I thought you should know." Emily thanked her and hung up, her stomach churning. Julia was moving fast, building momentum, painting herself as the rightful heir, while Emily became the shadowy obstacle. Later that day, Emily drove to the county clerk's office, the folder from the cabin clutched under her arm. She needed to see if the lake property had ever been registered in public records. The clerk, an elderly man with kind eyes, flipped through files and nodded. "Yes, here it is. Title's clean. In your father's name. Taxes paid up through last year?" Emily exhaled in relief, but then the clerk frowned. "This year's bill hasn't been paid. Deadline's coming in 2 months. If it lapses, county can seize the property." The words hit like a stone. Julia was right about one thing. Dreams didn't pay bills. If Emily couldn't cover the taxes, the property would be gone, and with it, her father's vision. That night, as rain tapped against the farmhouse windows, Emily sat with the folder spread across the table. The numbers stared back at her. Costs, deadlines, debts she had no idea how to meet. Her teaching salary barely covered the basics. Taking on this responsibility felt impossible. But her father's words echoed. Emily understands. She'll know what to do. She closed her eyes, clutching the page until it crinkled. Maybe she didn't know yet, but she would find a way. She had to. Outside, the storm swelled, lightning flashing across the fields. Emily rose and pressed her palm against the glass, watching the rain blur the landscape. The farm, the cabin, the lake, everything hung in the balance, and Julia was circling closer, ready to strike again. Somewhere in that storm lay the truth, and Emily knew it would come for both of them sooner than either expected. The rain had cleared by morning, but the farmhouse felt no lighter. Emily's eyes were gritty from another sleepless night. She brewed coffee, the smell filling the kitchen, but her stomach turned too sour to drink it. On the table lay the attorney's letter, stark black ink against cream paper. Renounce your claim, or else. Emily traced the lines with her finger, as if pressing hard enough might erase them. The truth was plain. Julia had money, influence, and the will to fight. Emily had memories and a folder of papers her sister dismissed as fantasy. The imbalance felt crushing. A knock rattled the door. She opened it to find Sheriff Miller, his wide-brim hat shadowing his weathered face. He tipped it politely. "Morning, Emily. Mind if I come in?" Her heart jumped. "Of course." He stepped inside, glancing at the letter on the table. "I hate to be the bearer of trouble, but Julia filed a preliminary claim yesterday. Says she intends to contest your standing as an heir." Emily's throat tightened. "Already?" "Already," he confirmed. His eyes softened. "I don't take sides, but you should know. She's talking loud at the diner. Folks are hearing her version first." Emily sank into a chair, rubbing her temples. Julia never wasted time. She knew how to shape opinion, and in a small town, reputation was currency. Sheriff Miller set his hat on the table. "Emily, I knew your dad. He respected you. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. But I'd advise finding counsel. This won't stop at gossip." Her voice cracked. "I can't afford a lawyer." He studied her for a long moment. "Then you'll need something stronger than money. Proof." When he left, the farmhouse seemed to sigh under the weight of silence. Emily turned to the folder again, searching for answers. Tucked behind the project sketches was another photograph of the unknown woman, this time with her father, standing on the porch of the lake cabin, arms around each other. Emily's pulse quickened. Who was she? A partner? A confidant? The back of the photograph bore a faint scrawl. "For Haven." Emily whispered the word aloud. Haven. Her father had named the project after this woman, perhaps, or maybe she had inspired it. She knew Julia would seize on it if she ever saw it, spin it into scandal, call it proof of manipulation. Emily needed to know the truth before her sister twisted it into another weapon. That afternoon, Emily drove into town, the folder hidden in her bag. At the library, she pored over old town records, squinting at microfilm reels of newspapers. After an hour, she found it, a small article from 19 years ago. Local teacher advocates for foster retreat center. The grainy photo showed her father beside the same woman, identified as Margaret Lane, a social worker who had once led foster programs in the county. The article mentioned plans for a retreat at Lakeview, a collaboration between her father and Margaret to give children respite from unstable homes. Emily's chest warmed with recognition. This wasn't some secret affair or shadowy scheme. It was compassion. The dream she'd found in the folder wasn't just her father's, it was Margaret's too. But the article ended on a grim note. The project stalled after Margaret died suddenly in a car accident. The funding collapsed. The dream went dormant. Emily leaned back, eyes stinging. Margaret's face in the photos seemed alive, filled with a kindness Emily wished she could have known. She could almost hear her father's voice. She believed in this as much as I did. Carry it forward. The slam of a door startled her. Julia walked into the library, heels clacking across the floor. She spotted Emily instantly, lips curling into a smirk. "Of course," Julia said, striding over, "digging for scraps in dusty files, still trying to prove you matter?" Emily snapped the folder shut. "I'm researching Dad's project, the one at the lake." Julia arched a brow. Project? Please. That cabin is worthless. You think some half-baked charity idea from 20 years ago gives you standing? The court won't care. Emily stood, clutching the folder to her chest. It mattered to him. That's enough for me. Julia leaned in close, her perfume sharp and cloying. Then you'll drown with it. And when you do, I'll make sure the whole town sees you for what you are, a pretender living off my family's name. She turned on her heel and walked out, leaving the air heavy with venom. By the time Emily drove back to the farmhouse, evening shadows stretched long across the fields. She parked in the gravel drive and sat for a moment, gripping the wheel. Julia's threat echoed, but so did the article's headline, Retreat for Foster Children. Margaret Lane, a dream worth finishing. Inside, she spread the documents across the kitchen table. The financial estimates were old, but she could update them. The property taxes were steep, but perhaps a non-profit status could ease the burden. The plan wasn't impossible. It was just unfinished. As she scribbled notes, the phone rang again. This time, it was Pastor Green, her father's longtime friend. Emily, I heard Julia's stirring up trouble. Don't let her shake you. Your father once told me he believed you'd carry his work forward. He trusted you. The words pierced through her weariness. He said that? He did, more than once. And he asked me to keep an envelope safe for you. I wasn't sure when to give it, but perhaps now is the time. Emily's breath caught. An envelope? I'll bring it tomorrow. After the call, she sat in stunned silence. Another envelope, another secret waiting to surface. That night, the farmhouse creaked and groaned as wind pushed against the windows. Emily sat at her father's desk, staring at the scattered papers. Every new discovery seemed to strengthen her, but also draw Julia's rage closer. She pressed her hand over the photograph of Margaret, whispering softly, "Help me understand. Help me finish what you started with him." In the stillness, she almost imagined a reply, faint but steady. Carry it forward. Emily closed her eyes, exhaustion tugging at her, but beneath it all was a flicker of resolve. For the first time, she felt the fight wasn't about survival. It was about honor, about a dream bigger than both sisters. Still, one truth gnawed at her. Julia would never let go without a battle. And Emily wasn't sure how much more she could withstand before something in her broke. The next morning, Emily opened the door to find Pastor Green standing on the porch, his shoulders hunched against the cold. He carried a weathered envelope in one hand, sealed with brittle wax. His smile was faint but warm. "Your father asked me to give you this when the time was right," he said, pressing it into her palm. "I think he knew the battles you'd face." Emily's fingers trembled as she accepted it. The wax cracked softly as she broke the seal. Inside lay several pages written in her father's uneven script, along with a small brass key. "My dear Emily," the letter began. "By now, Julia has made her position clear. I feared this day would come. You are my daughter not by blood but by choice, and it is by choice that love holds its weight. Julia may never understand this, but I hope time will soften her heart." Emily blinked back tears. Her father's voice seemed alive in the looping handwriting, as if he sat across the table speaking to her again. She read on. "You will find in the safe deposit box at First County Bank documents Margaret and I prepared years ago. They explain our vision for Haven and the steps we took to protect it. I could not bring Julia into this plan. Her heart was elsewhere. But you listened. You cared. That was enough for me to trust you." The brass key glinted in her hand. A deposit box, more documents, another piece of the puzzle. Pastor Green watched quietly. "He believed in you, Emily. Don't let Julia's noise drown that out." She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. That afternoon, Emily drove into town, the key in her pocket like a stone pulling her forward. At the bank, a clerk led her to a quiet room and placed a box on the table. Inside were thick binders of paperwork, faded receipts, and another envelope. She opened the envelope first. Inside was a letter signed jointly by her father and Margaret. Haven Retreat Center Charter, it read at the top. They had registered a nonprofit 2 decades ago, though it had lain dormant since Margaret's death. Beneath it, detailed financial plans mapped out a long-term vision. Cabins, activity halls, therapy programs. Emily's chest swelled. This wasn't just a dream. It had once been real, incorporated, and legal. Her father had preserved it for her to carry forward. She turned the page and froze. Tucked between the documents was a handwritten addendum. Emily to inherit controlling rights to Haven in the event of my death. It bore her father's signature, witnessed and notarized. Her hands shook. This wasn't just symbolic. It was binding. As she stared at the words, the bank clerk peeked in. "Ms. Hart? There's someone waiting for you in the lobby." Emily gathered the papers quickly, sliding them back into the box. When she stepped out, Julia stood by the counter, arms crossed, lips curved in a cold smile. "Well, well," Julia drawled. "I thought I might find you here. Digging through safes now? What are you hiding, Emily?" Emily's heart pounded. "This isn't your business." Julia leaned closer, her voice low and sharp. "Everything tied to Dad is my business. If you think a few old papers will save you, think again. My attorney's filing a petition tomorrow. You'll be dragged into court whether you want it or not." Emily forced herself to meet her sister's gaze. Then let the court see who Dad trusted. For the first time, Julia's smile faltered, but only for a second. She turned on her heel and walked out, leaving the echo of her heels clattering like gunfire across the marble floor. Back at the farmhouse, Emily spread the charter across the kitchen table. Her father's handwriting seemed to lift from the page, filling the room with his conviction. She could almost hear him. "We don't build for ourselves, Emily. We build for others. That is legacy." But the numbers on the budget sheets chilled her. Land surveys, building costs, program expenses, all daunting. Taxes loomed closer than ever, and she had no money to cover them, let alone launch a retreat. The phone rang. It was the county office reminding her of overdue farm taxes. The deadline was 30 days away. If unpaid, the farm could face foreclosure. Emily pressed her hand to her forehead. Julia wasn't wrong about one thing. Dreams didn't erase bills. She felt trapped between honoring her father's legacy and the crushing weight of financial reality. That evening, Mrs. Whitaker stopped by with a loaf of bread. She lowered her voice at the door. "Emily, I shouldn't repeat gossip, but Julia's been talking at the salon. Says you're squatting on land that doesn't belong to you. Folks are starting to wonder." Emily's stomach twisted. Julia was poisoning the well faster than she could clear it. Mrs. Whitaker squeezed her hand. "Don't let her break you. Your father loved you. Everyone who mattered knows that." After she left, Emily sat at the window watching the last light fade from the fields. The farmhouse had always felt like a sanctuary, but now it seemed fragile, balanced on the edge of collapse. She thought again of Margaret's photo, of her kind eyes and the unfinished dream. If her father and Margaret had believed enough to start this, then Emily couldn't give up now. But how? Her gaze fell on the deposit box key resting on the table. She had taken only part of the documents home. Perhaps more answers waited inside. She would return tomorrow. But tomorrow came with a knock at the door that shook the walls. When she opened it, a courier handed her a thick packet. Official court summons. Julia had wasted no time. Emily's hands trembled as she read. A hearing date was set for 3 weeks away. Julia was petitioning for sole inheritance, citing biological precedents. 3 weeks. That was all the time Emily had to prepare. She pressed her back against the door, sliding down until she sat on the cold floor, the summons heavy in her lap. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "Hold steady. You'll know what to do." But right now, she didn't. Not yet. Emily lay awake long into the night. The summons spread open on the nightstand where the glow of the lamp made the legal words blur together. Julia had forced her hand at last. A court hearing in 3 weeks. 3 weeks to defend her place not only in the house, but in the very definition of family. She turned the light off and stared into the dark, listening to the groans of the old farmhouse as wind pressed against the walls. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, steady and sure. "You'll know what to do." But what if she didn't? The next morning she returned to the bank, determined to comb through the deposit box again. The clerk led her to the small private room and set the metal box on the table. Emily lifted the lid, her heart thudding. Beneath the binders lay another envelope she hadn't noticed before, smaller, almost hidden between receipts. She pulled it out carefully. On the front, in her father's handwriting, was a single word: truth. Her pulse quickened as she unfolded the letter inside. It began plainly. "If you are reading this, then Julia has chosen conflict. I feared she would. There are things you must know, Emily, things that may wound you but also protect you." She read on, her breath catching with every line. The letter revealed that Julia had, years ago, pressured their father for advances on her inheritance, signing promissory notes he had never disclosed. He had kept copies of every transaction. Inside the envelope were those notes, bearing Julia's unmistakable signature, proof that she had already taken far more than she admitted. Emily sat back, stunned. This wasn't just evidence, it was a shield. If Julia tried to paint herself as the wronged heir, Emily could show the court exactly how their father had already provided for her. The notes totaled tens of thousands, vacations, cars, frivolities. Emily's chest tightened. She hated the thought of using this against her sister, but what choice did she have? As she drove back through town, the sky gray and heavy above, she noticed Julia's car parked outside the diner. Through the window, Julia was seated with 2 of her lawyers, her voice animated as she gestured, drawing laughter from the table. Emily slowed, a knot of dread forming. Julia was building her army while Emily was left to stand alone with a stack of papers and fading courage. She pressed the accelerator, the farmhouse pulling her back like a refuge she wasn't sure she deserved. That evening, Pastor Green came by again, carrying a tin of soup from his wife. He found Emily at the kitchen table, surrounded by documents. "You look like you've aged a year in a week," he said gently. She managed a tired smile. "Julia's filing fast. I don't have time." He pulled up a chair. "You do have something she doesn't. Your father's trust. Don't underestimate how much that will matter." Emily hesitated, then slid the promissory notes across the table. His eyebrows rose as he skimmed them. "These are strong. Judges don't like entitlement dressed as virtue. If you present this carefully, it could change the entire case." She nodded, relief flickering through her chest, but the weight remained, because Julia would never back down quietly. 2 nights later, the phone rang past 9. Emily answered to hear Julia's sharp tone. "Enjoying your little treasure hunt? Don't think I don't know what you found. You really think dragging my past into the light will make you look noble? All it will show is how pathetic you are, clinging to scraps." Emily's hand trembled, but her voice came steadier than she felt. "I'm not clinging. I'm honoring what Dad wanted. There's a difference." Julia laughed bitterly. "When the court hears me, they'll remember I'm the blood daughter. And you," her voice dropped to a hiss, "you'll be nothing but a name on a file." The line clicked dead, leaving Emily staring into silence. Sleep eluded her again. She walked the creaking halls of the farmhouse, each room steeped in memory. The worn recliner where her father read the paper, the kitchen table scarred by years of family meals, the study filled with books still marked with his notes. This was more than inheritance. It was a life, a history. To give it up would be to let Julia erase her completely, and Emily couldn't let that happen. 3 weeks. The clock was ticking louder now, every day shrinking the distance to the courtroom. The following morning, she called the county courthouse to ask about filing her own petition. The clerk explained she would need to submit her evidence formally. The thought made her stomach churn. But she agreed to schedule an appointment. She couldn't stall anymore. She had to fight. Before hanging up, the clerk added something that unsettled her further. Julia had already requested an expedited hearing. Emily had barely 2 weeks left. The floor seemed to tilt under her feet. 2 weeks to prepare for the biggest fight of her life. 2 weeks to uncover everything her father had left behind and decide how to use it. That evening, she drove back to the lake cabin, the folder clutched in her lap. She needed to breathe in that place again, to feel what her father had envisioned. The cabin stood quiet against the fading light, the water rippling with a soft wind. She stepped inside, dust swirling as her footsteps echoed. Sitting on the sagging couch, she opened the folder and let her fingers trace Margaret's face in the photo. "Help me," she whispered into the silence. "Show me how to do this." The only reply was the rustle of trees outside, yet something steadied inside her. She wasn't only protecting land, she was protecting a dream meant to shelter children who had nowhere else. That mattered more than Julia's greed or her own fear. As she drove back under the cold stars, Emily realized something else. Julia thought the court battle would break her, but maybe it would reveal who she truly was. The daughter who had been chosen, the one her father had trusted, the one who could carry forward what others had abandoned. She tightened her grip on the wheel. 2 weeks. It wasn't much, but it was enough to stand, enough to show the truth, and perhaps, just perhaps, enough to save the legacy her father had left in her hands. The courthouse steps loomed taller than Emily remembered. She climbed them slowly, clutching a folder to her chest, her heart hammering like it wanted to break free. Inside were the notes, the letters, the charter. Everything her father had left. Today wasn't the official hearing, but the clerk had scheduled a preliminary conference to review filings. Julia would be there. Emily braced herself. The waiting area smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper. Julia arrived with her attorney in tow, both dressed in dark suits that exuded power. Julia's eyes met Emily's across the room, her smile a thin blade. She sauntered over. "You look nervous," she murmured. "Don't worry, it'll be quick. You'll sign and this will all be over." Emily steadied her voice. "I won't sign anything. Dad trusted me. You can't erase that." Julia's smile widened, almost pitying. Trust doesn't hold up in court. Blood does. Then she turned back to her attorney, dismissing Emily as though she were a child. Inside the small conference room, the judge's clerk sat at a table, flipping through the petitions. He adjusted his glasses as he read Julia's claim, then Emily's response. "Ms. Hart," he said to Emily, "you're representing yourself?" Emily nodded. Her cheeks burned, but her voice didn't waver. "Yes, sir." The clerk studied her for a moment before continuing. "These documents you submitted, the promissory notes, the nonprofit charter, are significant. You'll need to prepare exhibits for the hearing. Do you understand?" "I do," she said softly. Julia's attorney leaned forward, his tone sharp. "The court must also recognize that Ms. Julia Hart is the biological heir. We will challenge any documents presented as irrelevant to the matter of inheritance law." Emily felt her stomach knot, but she forced herself to speak. "These documents show my father's intent. That matters." The clerk raised a hand. "Intent does matter, especially when substantiated. This will go to hearing." Julia's lips tightened, the first crack in her armor. Afterward, as Emily left the courthouse, Julia followed her outside. "You think you've scored a victory," Julia hissed, her heels clicking on the pavement. "But you'll embarrass yourself in front of everyone. I'll tear those papers apart, and when you lose, you'll crawl back here begging me for scraps." Emily met her sister's eyes, a strange calm settling over her. "I don't want scraps. I want the truth." Julia blinked, caught off guard, but recovered quickly with a bitter laugh. "We'll see how far that gets you." The next days blurred together in preparation. Emily spent hours at the kitchen table, organizing documents into neat stacks. She borrowed a projector from the school where she worked, determined to show every letter, every note. Late at night, she practiced speaking aloud, stumbling over words, starting again. At first, her voice shook, but little by little, it steadied. By the third night, she could say it without breaking. My father trusted me with this legacy, not because of blood, but because of choice. Neighbors began to notice the strain. Mrs. Whitaker came by with fresh eggs and encouragement. Pastor Green stopped in to pray with her, reminding her that standing for truth was never easy, but always necessary. Even Sheriff Miller visited one evening, leaning against the doorframe as he said, "I can't speak in court, but I'll tell anyone who asks that your father respected you more than anyone. Don't forget that." Their support filled the cracks where doubt threatened to seep in. But Julia was working just as hard in her own way. Rumors spread through town that Emily was clinging to fantasies, that she was exploiting a dead man's kindness. At the grocery store, whispers followed her down the aisles. In line at the post office, 2 women turned their backs when she walked in. Emily tried to keep her chin up, but the isolation weighed heavy. Julia had always known how to wield gossip like a weapon. One evening, as Emily left the school after grading papers late, she found Julia waiting by her car. The parking lot was empty, shadows stretching long under the street lamps. Julia leaned against the hood of her sleek sedan, arms crossed. "Do you really think Dad would have chosen you over me?" she asked, her voice low. "I was his daughter, his blood." Emily stopped a few feet away. "He chose me, too. That's what you can't stand." Julia's eyes flashed. "You stole him from me. Every moment he spent with you was a moment he didn't spend on me." Her voice cracked for the first time, brittle beneath the anger. "You think you were the chosen one? Maybe you were just the replacement." The words cut, sharp and raw, but Emily held her ground. "He never replaced anyone. He loved us both. You just couldn't see it." Julia pushed off the car, her expression twisting. "Love doesn't matter in court. Money does." She slid into her car and drove off, tail lights bleeding red into the night. Emily sat in her own car afterward, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles whitened. Julia's words echoed, needling at old wounds, replacement, pretender, outsider. Yet beneath the sting was something else, pity. Julia's fury wasn't just greed, it was fear. Fear of being less loved, fear of being left behind. For the first time, Emily glimpsed the brokenness behind her sister's rage. The days passed quickly, each one tightening the rope around Emily's chest. 2 weeks dwindled to 1. On the eve of the hearing, she gathered all the documents once more. Her father's letters, Margaret's photo, the promissory notes, the charter for Haven. Each piece told a story of love, of trust, of responsibility. She prayed it would be enough. That night, she walked through the farmhouse, touching the worn banister, the framed family photos, the study filled with his books. She whispered to the empty rooms, "I'll do my best, Dad. I hope that's enough." The silence answered, steady and familiar, wrapping around her like a fragile comfort. Morning came with a gray sky and a biting wind. Emily dressed in her best outfit, simple but neat, and drove to the courthouse with her folder on the passenger seat. The town square was bustling, people whispering as she walked by. She felt their eyes on her, their judgment heavy, but she kept her gaze forward, her steps steady. When she entered the courtroom, Julia was already seated with her attorney, her posture rigid, her hair gleaming under the lights. She didn't look at Emily, but the tension between them filled the room like electricity. The judge entered, the gavel struck, and the hearing began. Emily drew in a deep breath. The battle for her father's legacy, for her own belonging, had begun at last. The judge, a stern man with silver hair and tired eyes, adjusted his glasses as he looked over the case file. "We're here to hear arguments in the matter of the Hart estate," he began. Ms. Julia Hart has petitioned for sole inheritance, citing biological precedents. Ms. Emily Hart has filed a response. We will proceed with opening statements. Julia's attorney rose first. His voice was smooth, confident. Your Honor, this is a simple matter. The law is clear. Julia Hart is the biological daughter. Emily, while raised in the household, is not of blood. Our position is that she should be recognized for her relationship, but inheritance rights properly follow lineage. He sat, exuding certainty. The judge nodded. Ms. Hart? His eyes shifted to Emily. You may present your opening. Emily rose slowly, her palms damp. She cleared her throat, her voice thin at first. Your Honor, my father chose me. He adopted me when I was 9. He didn't see me as anything less than his daughter, and I have documents to show his intent that he wanted me to carry forward his work, not because of blood, but because of trust. Her voice steadied. This isn't only about inheritance. It's about honoring his legacy. Julia rolled her eyes, whispering sharply to her attorney, but the judge raised a hand for silence. Proceed with evidence. Emily set the first document on the table, sliding it forward. These are promissory notes signed by Julia, requests for advance inheritance money that my father gave her. Vacations, cars, luxury purchases. He considered those part of her inheritance. She placed the copies in front of the judge. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Julia's face flushed crimson. Julia's attorney leapt to his feet. Irrelevant. Families help their children all the time. These are gifts, not inheritance. Emily met his protest calmly. Each note was signed, labeled as advance inheritance. My father documented them carefully. He wanted it clear they were not gifts. The judge studied the papers, his brow furrowed. Noted. Emily drew in a breath and lifted the next folder. This is the charter for Haven Retreat, a nonprofit my father and Margaret Lane created to serve foster children. He left controlling rights to me. He believed I understood its purpose, and he trusted me to continue it. She placed the charter and Margaret's photo before the judge. The air in the room shifted. This wasn't just money, it was vision, legacy. Julia leaned forward, her voice rising. That's a dead project. It never even happened. It doesn't prove anything. The judge's gavel struck once. Ms. Hart, you will remain silent until called. Julia sank back, fuming, her lawyer whispering urgently in her ear. Emily felt her pulse in her throat, but she pressed on. My father kept records. He wanted this dream to live on, and he left me letters that show he trusted me to protect it. She slid the handwritten notes across the table. The judge read silently for a long moment, the only sound the faint shuffle of papers. At last, he looked up. Ms. Julia Hart, do you dispute the authenticity of these documents? Julia's attorney hesitated. We request time to verify. The judge nodded. Very well, but they will be entered provisionally. He turned to Emily. Do you have further evidence? She shook her head. Not at this time. Her knees trembled as she sat down, but inside something steadier had taken root. She had spoken. She had shown the truth. Julia's attorney launched into a rebuttal, arguing bloodlines, statutes, precedents. His words were sharp, practiced, but they rang hollow against the handwritten letters lying on the judge's desk. Emily watched Julia's face as her lawyer spoke. Beneath the fury, there was a flicker of something else. Panic. The hearing stretched long, the air thick with tension. Finally, the judge leaned back, folding his hands. We will recess until tomorrow. Both parties will return with final arguments. This is not a matter I take lightly. The gavel struck, and the room emptied. Julia stormed out first, her heels clicking like gunfire. Emily gathered her papers slowly, her hand still trembling, when she felt a tap on her shoulder. It was the clerk. He leaned close, his voice low. Your father left more than you realize. Check the back of the Haven Charter. There's an addendum. Then he walked away before she could respond. Emily's breath caught. She pulled the charter from her folder and flipped it over. There, in faded ink, was a handwritten note. If Emily accepts this trust, she also inherits authority over the farmhouse and surrounding land to support Haven. Her heart stopped. Authority over the farmhouse. Not Julia. Her. She pressed the paper to her chest, her eyes burning with tears. Her father had hidden his intent deeper than even she had known. Tomorrow, she could reveal it. Tomorrow, everything could change. But as she stepped into the courthouse hallway, Julia was waiting. Her face was pale, her eyes cold. "Don't think you've won," she whispered. "If you use those papers, I'll destroy you. I don't care what it costs. You'll regret ever setting foot in that courtroom." She spun away, leaving Emily rooted to the floor, the weight of both fear and hope pressing down. Tomorrow would decide everything. The judge recessed for the day, but the quiet that followed felt like the eye of a storm. Outside the courthouse, townspeople clustered in small groups, whispering and trading glances as if choosing sides. Emily walked past them with her folder clutched to her chest, the weight of the addendum pressing at the back of her mind like a pulse she could feel with every step. The note about authority over the farmhouse, authority to support Haven, was more than paperwork. It was a mission he had entrusted to her in a way that wasn't obvious until it was necessary. She let herself breathe for the first time in weeks, thinking that perhaps this would be enough. But the days that followed proved how thin enough could be. Julia's campaign stepped up like a machine kicked into higher gear. Her team scraped social media for any story they could weaponize. An influencer from the nearby city posted an unkind thread about outsiders, trying to claim small-town inheritance. Old rumors resurfaced. Arguments that had died with time were dug up and amplified. Julia's lawyers filed motions, each one more expensive than the last, forcing Emily into a defensive posture she could scarcely afford. It wasn't only legal pressure. The county tax notice arrived with the cheerful efficiency of bureaucratic finality. The past due taxes on the farm and the lake property had not been received. A delinquency notice would be filed in 10 days, and a lien could follow. For a moment, Emily felt the earth move under her feet. She had been promising herself she would find a way to cover the taxes before they spiraled beyond reach. But the clock didn't care about promises. It ticked forward with cold reliability. She tried calling old friends and acquaintances, asking for loans or small donations. Some were sympathetic but strapped themselves. Others, when asked, hedged and offered vague support. "Once things are sorted," they'd say, and Emily could hear resignation in their voices like a door closing. She hated that she had to ask. She hated that she had to make people choose sides. The farmhouse, the lake, the dream of a retreat for kids. Everything began to feel like it might slip through her fingers. Late one night, exhausted and raw from a day of preparing exhibits for the next hearing, she found an envelope slipped under her front door. Her name was written in her father's handwriting, and the paper inside smelled faintly of pipe tobacco. There was only a single line: "Trust the people who loved me for who I was, not who they wished me to be." No return address, no signature. A small, deliberate mystery tossed into her lap. The next afternoon, Julia's team filed an emergency motion to freeze any transfer of property or control until the court could fully adjudicate the claims. It was the legal equivalent of slamming a lock on a door. The motion argued that allowing Emily to assume authority over the farmhouse and the Haven charter would risk irreparable harm if the documents were later found invalid. It was a neat, vicious bit of lawyering. Buy time. Suffocate the other side's options. Force the weaker party to fold. When the county clerk called to confirm the lien notice, Emily felt a cold, sickening panic she could not quiet. She reached out to Pastor Green and asked for advice. He listened, then said, "Emily, sometimes the only way forward is to bind the community with the truth. People support causes they believe in. Let them know what Haven can be. Let them see it as a place that could keep children safe. If you can get the town behind you, Julia's narrative will lose its weight." It sounded simple when he said it, and ridiculous when Emily tried to imagine it as a plan. Her father had always believed in quiet stewardship. He had never been one for rallies or fundraising campaigns. The idea of turning his personal vision into a public crusade felt like a betrayal and a salvation at once. Still, the lean deadline and the aggressive motions left her with no real choice. She began the clumsy work of community organizing. Emily designed a simple 2-page flyer out of her own savings at the local print shop. Haven, a place to rest for children in need. She packed the trunk of her car with binders, photographs, Margaret's faded plans, and a small poster that read, in her father's handwriting from a copy of his letter, "We build for others." She left flyers at the diner, knocked on doors, and went to the community center with a trembling stack of papers and a willingness to speak. At first, the turnout was thin. A handful of people came: Mrs. Whitaker, the school janitor, and a woman from the foster care agency who had heard of Margaret Lane. But then, unexpectedly, Sheriff Miller walked in, and with him, a man who lent cars and equipment to the county fair. Their presence lent a credibility Emily desperately needed. Sheriff Miller stood and said plainly, "I know Mr. Hart. He wasn't a man who squandered anything. He cared about kids and community. If we can protect what he started, it will honor him." The room hummed with a new energy. Encouraged, Emily told the story she had tried to tell for weeks but had never put into public words. She showed the binders of paperwork, projected with the borrowed projector, and read passages from Margaret's proposals. She let people hear, in the rough voice she'd practiced in front of the sink, what the retreat would look like. Cabins where children could sleep without fear, a small garden to grow fresh food, volunteers to teach skills, counselors to listen. Faces in the room softened. Some people asked how they could help. Others offered small donations, enough for the immediate tax bill, not the whole project, but a lifeline all the same. Word spread. Local radio picked up the story. Then a blogger from a neighboring town wrote a piece about a grassroots effort to save a dream for foster children. The narrative shifted from a private family fight to a community cause. Julia's team tried to counter, but the public now saw a woman, not a shadow, standing to keep alive a vision that could protect the town's most vulnerable. It changed the tenor of the court of public opinion, if not the legal court. The night before the lean deadline, Emily sat with Pastor Green and the small group of volunteers who had come forward. They had pooled money, called a tax attorney who offered a pro bono consult, and drafted a campaign plan to raise more funds. Emily felt a fragile, grateful relief. The farmhouse breathed a little easier, but the legal locks Julia had put in place still meant the court could block any formal transfer of authority. On the morning the lien notice was due to be filed, a courier delivered an unexpected packet to Emily's hands, a certified letter from an unfamiliar law firm in the city. Inside was an offer, a donor willing to pledge the exact amount needed to cover the taxes and the immediate legal fees, contingent on Emily signing a temporary management agreement, allowing the donor to oversee emergency funds for Haven until the court settled the dispute. The letter carried a handwritten postscript. "We believe in Mr. Hart's dream. We don't want to see it lost." The donor's name belonged to a woman who ran a charitable foundation in the state capital and had been quietly supporting foster initiatives for years. Emily sat at the kitchen table, the letter trembling in her hands. This was the lifeline she'd asked the universe for in moments of desperate prayer. But even as relief washed through her, a cautious voice in the back of her head whispered about strings attached. Pastor Green reminded her gently, "This is to keep the lights on, not to sacrifice the mission. Read every line. Protect the charter." She agreed. The donor's lawyer drafted a management agreement that preserved Emily's rights while allowing the funds to be administered through the foundation's oversight until the court's final decision. It was not perfect, but it prevented the immediate foreclosure and bought them critical time. Julia responded like a hurricane. She claimed collusion, alleged the donor had financial ties to Emily, and accused Emily of orchestrating a stunt to manipulate public sentiment. Her lawyers demanded an emergency hearing to review the donor arrangement. The judge, pressed by both sides and wary of the very public pressure that now swirled around the case, called for a hearing within days. The hearing arrived with a media presence that Marcus, the city blogger, said he'd never seen for a county dispute. Cameras lined the courthouse steps. Emily felt suddenly exposed, the intimate risk of her father's plans now public theater. She thought of Margaret's photograph, of her father's steady hand, and tried to breathe. In the packed courtroom, the donor's representative spoke with clarity and compassion. They affirmed the foundation's intentions, to keep Haven alive and the property safe for children, not to seize it for profit. They presented letters from other nonprofits and small grants the foundation had given to similar projects. The judge listened, brows knitting, then leaned back and tapped his pen against his lip. After a long deliberation, he announced a temporary injunction. The donor's funds would be accepted to cover the immediate tax liability and secure the properties from foreclosure, but the court would retain oversight pending final adjudication. It was a compromise that allowed Haven to survive the immediate threat, but did not end the legal fight. Outside the courthouse, the crowd that had been watching cheered quietly. Julia's face was set in a brittle mask. Emily felt tears come hot and sudden, not from victory, but from the exhaustion of it all. The battle was far from over. The donor had bought time, the community had rallied, and for the first time there was a plausible path to realizing her father's vision. But darker things loomed, motions yet to be filed, public narratives yet to be twisted, and Emily knew the hardest part might still be ahead. The courthouse buzzed with tension as the final hearing date approached. Reporters lingered on the steps, townspeople filled the benches inside, and the air itself felt heavy with expectation. Emily sat at the petitioner's table, her folder neatly organized, though her palms sweated despite her composure. Across from her, Julia adjusted her blazer and whispered furiously to her attorney, her eyes darting like a cornered animal. The judge entered, his gavel striking once. This court will hear final arguments in the matter of the Hart estate. Both parties may present closing evidence. His voice carried the authority of a man who had weathered decades of disputes. Yet even he seemed to recognize this case had become more than a matter of inheritance. It was a referendum on love, family, and legacy. Julia's attorney launched into his closing. Your Honor, the statutes are clear. Inheritance flows to biological heirs. My client, Julia Hart, is the rightful beneficiary. The opposing party, though loved in her way, was adopted. That bond is emotional, not legal. To divert property and assets based on sentiment sets a dangerous precedent. He spoke smoothly, but Emily caught the strain beneath the polish. They were leaning hard on bloodline because everything else had cracked. Then it was Emily's turn. She rose, her hands trembling only slightly. Your Honor, my father chose me. Adoption isn't lesser, it's deliberate. He raised me as his daughter and left me not just memories, but responsibilities. Haven Retreat wasn't a whim, it was a mission. He documented his intent in letters, in charters, even in legal addendums. I have them here. She stepped forward and laid the charter with the handwritten addendum before the judge. This document grants me authority over the farmhouse and surrounding land for the purpose of Haven. My father didn't leave this to chance. He prepared for this exact moment. The judge read the page slowly. A murmur swept the room. Julia shot to her feet. That's forged. It has to be. He never would have done that. Her voice cracked, too shrill for the dignity of the courtroom. Her attorney tugged at her sleeve, urging her to sit, but she shook him off. He was manipulated. She tricked him. She always wanted to replace me. The judge's gavel struck twice. Order. Ms. Hart, you will remain seated. Julia sat heavily, glaring at Emily with eyes full of venom and desperation. Emily drew in a steadying breath and continued. I didn't replace anyone. I stood beside him. I listened. I cared. This wasn't about money for me. It was about finishing what he started. He trusted me because I understood the difference between spending wealth and stewarding it. Her voice wavered, but only with emotion. This isn't about denying Julia a share. It's about protecting what my father built for the sake of children who need it. The judge leaned back, hands steepled beneath his chin. This court recognizes biological precedents. However, documents that demonstrate clear intent must be weighed heavily. I will review these addendums carefully before rendering a decision. He tapped his pen thoughtfully. Do either party have final statements? Julia leapt up again, ignoring her attorney's protests. Her voice broke as she shouted, "She was never his real daughter. Everyone knows it. He loved me more. He had to. She's nothing. She doesn't belong here." Her words echoed off the wood-paneled walls, raw and ugly. A hush fell across the room. Even the spectators shifted uncomfortably. Emily stood still, her throat tight. She wanted to shout back, to defend herself, but instead she whispered the words her father had once said, "Blood doesn't make family, love does." The silence that followed was heavier than any outburst could have been. The judge rapped the gavel once. "I will issue my ruling within the week." He stood, and the room emptied slowly, murmurs rising like wind through dry grass. Julia stalked out first, her face a mask of rage. Emily gathered her papers with hands that trembled, but not from fear, from relief. She had spoken her truth. The outcome was no longer in her control. Outside, the sky was overcast, a storm threatening at the horizon. Reporters swarmed, but Sheriff Miller and Pastor Green flanked Emily, guiding her through the crowd. "You did well," the pastor whispered. "You stood in the light. That's all your father ever wanted." She nodded, tears burning her eyes. For the first time, she felt she had honored him, whatever the judge decided. That night, exhaustion claimed her early. She dreamed of the farmhouse filled with children's laughter, of Margaret Lane smiling on the porch, of her father's steady hand resting on her shoulder. But just before dawn, the dream shifted. Julia's face appeared in the shadows, her eyes hollow. Her voice a whisper. "This isn't over." Emily woke with a start, the echo clinging to her in the dark. Days crept by, the town buzzing with speculation. At the diner, strangers offered her quiet smiles. At the school, colleagues pressed her hand in support. But others avoided her, unwilling to choose sides until the ruling came down. She lived suspended in uncertainty, caught between dread and hope. On the fourth day, an envelope arrived by courier, the judge's decision. Emily's hands shook as she slid it open, but before she could read, a knock rattled the door. Julia stood outside, her hair disheveled, her eyes wild. "Don't open it," she said, her voice hoarse. "Not until you hear me out." Emily froze. Julia had never come here before. She stepped aside slowly, allowing her sister in. Julia paced the living room, her composure gone. "You think this is about money, don't you? That I just want the house, the land, but it's not." She stopped, her eyes glistening with something like desperation. "Dad promised me something. He told me years ago there was a letter that explained everything. I never found it. Did you? Did he leave it for you?" Emily's breath caught. She remembered the envelope Pastor Green had given her, the one she hadn't yet opened because the hearing consumed her. A letter sealed with her father's careful hand. She hadn't dared read it yet, afraid of what it might demand. Slowly, she nodded. "Yes, he left one for me." Julia's face crumpled, half fury, half grief. "Then it's true. He trusted you more than me. He left you the words that should have been mine." Her voice broke. "Do you know what it feels like to be passed over in your own family? To watch someone else take the love that should have been yours?" Emily's throat tightened. She had always thought Julia's rage was greed, but now she saw the wound beneath it, raw, festering, unhealed since childhood. "I never took his love from you," Emily whispered. "It was always there for you. You just didn't want it the way he gave it." Julia shook her head violently, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You don't understand. You never will." Then she stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. Emily sank into a chair, the unopened court ruling still in her hand, the sealed letter from her father burning like a weight in her desk. Two truths lay before her, what the court decided and what her father's final words would reveal. One was law, the other was legacy. Both could change everything. Emily sat alone at the kitchen table, the court's envelope in one hand, her father's sealed letter in the other. Two futures waited for her, but she could only face one at a time. She laid the court ruling aside for the moment, her breath trembling, and broke the seal on her father's letter. "My dear Emily," it began, "if you are reading this, the court has been forced to do what I hoped family could do on its own. I feared Julia would fight, and I feared you would suffer for it, but I also trusted you to carry the truth with grace. There is something neither of you knows. I made provisions for Julia, not to reward her demands, but to give her a path forward. A trust account exists in her name, accessible only if she chooses service over entitlement. It will provide her living expenses, but only if she commits herself to meaningful work with Haven. She cannot access it without your approval as director. This was not meant to punish her, but to guide her back toward the heart she lost." Emily's hands trembled as she read. Her father had not abandoned Julia. He had built a path for her to return, but only through humility. Emily turned the page, her eyes blurring. "And for you, Emily, you were my choice. You were the child I sought, the one I entrusted with my heart. Do not let fear silence you. Do not let anger harden you. Carry Haven forward. Carry it for Margaret, for the children, and for yourself. Family is not a prize. It is a responsibility. I know you will honor it even when it costs you." She pressed the letter to her chest, tears spilling freely. For the first time, the burden felt less like a weight and more like a calling. Her father had seen the whole picture, Julia's flaws, Emily's fears, the fragile thread of hope that might tie them back together. He had left her not just authority, but a bridge. Only then did Emily open the court's ruling. The judge's words were measured, deliberate. He acknowledged biological precedents, but emphasized the weight of the evidence, the promissory notes, the nonprofit charter, the handwritten addendum. "It is the ruling of this court," the letter read, "that Emily Hart is the legal director of Haven Retreat and steward of the farmhouse property. Julia Hart shall retain rights to personal assets, but the land and its intended mission are entrusted to Emily Hart." Her breath left her in a rush. She had won, not everything, but enough. Enough to keep Haven alive. Enough to honor her father's trust, enough to protect the farmhouse. Relief flooded through her, but it was tempered by the memory of Julia's tear-streaked face. Her sister hadn't only lost property, she had lost the certainty of being loved the way she expected. 2 days later, Julia returned. She looked smaller, her makeup absent, her hair unkempt. "You got what you wanted," she said, her voice hollow. "The judge gave it to you." Emily folded her father's letter and slid it across the table. "He gave me responsibility, and he gave you a chance. Read it." Julia hesitated, then unfolded the pages. As she read, her face shifted, anger giving way to disbelief, disbelief to something more fragile. When she reached the part about the trust account, her hand shook. "He tied me to you," she whispered, "even from the grave. He made you the gatekeeper." Emily's voice was gentle. "He tied you to Haven. He wanted you to find a way back, Julia, not to me, to him, to who you could still be." Julia's tears fell unchecked. "All I ever wanted was to be enough for him, and now I'll never have the chance." Emily reached across the table, her hand resting lightly on Julia's. "You still have it, but only if you choose differently." For a long time, Julia said nothing. Then she whispered, "What would you have me do?" Emily thought of Margaret's photo, of her father's dream. "Help me build Haven, not as a rival, not as an heir, as a partner." Julia's laugh was bitter, but weak. "You'd trust me with that?" Emily nodded. "Dad did. Why shouldn't I?" The weeks that followed were uneasy, but different. Julia showed up at the lake property, at first reluctantly, then more consistently. She painted walls, cleared brush, hammered nails alongside volunteers. At times she snapped, complained, muttered that she should be elsewhere. But she stayed. And in staying, something softened. The sharpness dulled, the bitterness cracked. Months later, as the first children arrived for a weekend retreat, foster kids carrying bags too small for the weight of their lives, Emily stood on the porch and watched Julia kneel to greet them. Her sister's smile was tentative but real, her hand gentle as she helped a small boy with his shoelaces. It was a moment Emily knew their father would have cherished. That evening, when the children settled into bunks and the volunteers gathered by the fire pit, Julia sat beside Emily, her gaze on the flames. "Do you think he'd be proud of me?" she asked softly. Emily felt the sting of tears but answered without hesitation. "He already is. This is what he wanted, not the money, not the house. This." For the first time in years, Julia leaned her head on her sister's shoulder. They sat in silence, the crackle of fire wrapping them in warmth. The farmhouse loomed behind them, the lake glimmered in the moonlight, and Haven had begun to breathe. Emily thought of her father's words. Family is not a prize. It is a responsibility. She understood now. She would carry it forward, not alone, but with the sister who had once tried to take everything and instead found the chance to become someone new. If this story touched you, please subscribe to Tears Within and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear where you're listening from and what family means to you.